In a quiet Atlanta neighborhood, a routine traffic stop turned into a nightmare that would shake a community to its core. A pregnant black woman, her belly swollen with the promise of new life, faced unimaginable cruelty at the hands of a racist cop. What happened next wasn't just a moment of injustice. It sparked a chain of events that led to a husband's relentless pursuit of justice, a fight that would leave everyone stunned. It was a warm July evening in 2023 when Aisha Thompson, a 32-year-old schoolteacher, and her husband Marcus Thompson, a 35-year-old software engineer, were driving home from a prenatal checkup. Aisha was 7 months pregnant with their first child, a girl they had already named Maya. The couple was in high spirits, having just heard the doctor confirm that Maya was healthy and growing strong. Marcus kept one hand on the wheel and the other gently resting on Aisha's hand, their fingers intertwined as they talked about the nursery they were decorating. The soft hum of R&B played through the car speakers, and the world felt full of possibility. As they turned onto their street, a police cruiser's lights flashed behind them. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowing. He hadn't been speeding, and the car's registration was up to date. He signaled and pulled over to the side of the road, his hands steady but his heart beginning to race. Aisha squeezed his hand, her voice calm but firm. "It's fine, Marcus. Just do what they say, and we'll be home soon." The officer who approached the driver's side was Officer Daniel Hargrove, a 15-year veteran of the Atlanta Police Department. Hargrove was known in certain circles for his short temper and a history of complaints, most of which had been swept under the rug. His badge gleamed under the streetlights as he leaned toward Marcus's window, his face unreadable but his tone sharp. "License and registration," he demanded, without so much as a glance at Aisha. Marcus complied, handing over the documents with deliberate care. He kept his hands visible, his movements slow, just as he'd been taught in the unspoken lessons passed down through generations. Hargrove scanned the paperwork, his lips curling slightly as he looked back at Marcus. "You know why I pulled you over?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge that made Aisha's stomach tighten. "No, sir," Marcus replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Was I speeding?" Hargrove didn't answer directly. Instead, he stepped back and ordered Marcus to step out of the vehicle. Aisha's grip on Marcus's hand tightened, but she stayed silent, her eyes darting between her husband and the officer. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then opened the door and stepped out, his hands raised slightly to show he meant no threat. "Officer, can you tell me what this is about?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with concern. Hargrove's eyes narrowed. "You were swerving back there. You been drinking." The accusation hung in the air, baseless and sharp. Marcus shook his head, explaining that they were just coming from a doctor's appointment, but Hargrove cut him off. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he barked, stepping closer. Aisha, still seated in the passenger seat, leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but urgent. "Officer, I'm pregnant. We're just trying to get home. Please, can we?" Before she could finish, Hargrove turned toward her, his face twisting with irritation. "Stay out of this," he snapped, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. Aisha froze, her breath catching in her throat. Marcus took a step forward, instinctively moving to shield his wife, but Hargrove shoved him back, hard enough to make him stumble. "Don't move," the officer shouted, his voice echoing in the quiet street. What happened next unfolded in a blur of chaos and cruelty. Aisha, panicked for her husband, opened her door and stepped out of the car, her hands raised to show she was unarmed. "Please, he didn't do anything," she pleaded, her voice trembling but resolute. Hargrove spun toward her, his face contorted with rage. Without warning, he lunged forward and kicked Aisha in the stomach, the force of his boot sending her crumpling to the ground with a cry of pain. Marcus's world stopped. He lunged toward Aisha, his heart pounding in his chest, but Hargrove drew his weapon, screaming at him to stay back. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, began to gather, some recording the scene on their phones. Aisha clutched her stomach, gasping for breath, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "My baby, my baby." Marcus dropped to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as he tried to comfort her. "It's okay, Aisha, I'm here," he said, his voice breaking. He looked up at Hargrove, his eyes burning with a mix of fear and fury. "She's pregnant. Why would you do that?" Hargrove, unfazed, holstered his weapon and radioed for backup, claiming the situation was under control. He didn't offer Aisha help or call for medical assistance. An ambulance eventually arrived, called by a neighbor who had witnessed the assault. Aisha was rushed to Grady Memorial Hospital, where doctors worked frantically to stabilize her. Marcus stayed by her side, his mind racing with fear for his wife and unborn child. The kick had caused severe trauma, and Aisha was at risk of premature labor. 4 hours, Marcus sat in the hospital waiting room, praying for Aisha and Maya to pull through, his clothes still stained with the dirt from the street where he'd knelt beside his wife. Miraculously, Aisha and the baby survived, but the ordeal left deep scars. Aisha was placed on bed rest for the remainder of her pregnancy, and the emotional toll was immense. She woke up in the night, haunted by nightmares of that evening, her hands instinctively cradling her belly as if to protect Maya from further harm. Marcus, too, was changed. The man who had always believed in working within the system, who had trusted that justice would prevail, now felt a fire burning inside him. He couldn't let Hargrove walk away from what he'd done. The incident sparked outrage in the community. The videos recorded by neighbors went viral on social media, shared thousands of times with hashtags like #JusticeForAisha and #EndPoliceViolence. Protests erupted outside the Atlanta Police Department, with activists demanding Hargrove's badge and accountability for the systemic issues that allowed such an officer to remain on the force. The Thompson story became a rallying cry, a painful reminder of the dangers Black families face in encounters with law enforcement. But Marcus wasn't content to let protests and hashtags define their fight. He wanted justice, not just for Aisha and Maya, but for every person who had suffered at the hands of officers like Hargrove. He began researching Hargrove's record, digging into public records and speaking with community organizers. What he uncovered was chilling. Hargrove had a history of excessive force complaints, particularly against Black and brown individuals. Over the years, at least a dozen allegations had been filed, ranging from verbal abuse to physical assaults, but none had resulted in meaningful consequences. Internal reviews had consistently cleared him, and in some cases, complainants reported being intimidated into dropping their cases. Marcus, with his background in software engineering, was methodical and relentless. He reached out to a local civil rights attorney, Lauren Brooks, who had a reputation for taking on tough cases against law enforcement. Together, they built a case against Hargrove and the Atlanta Police Department, alleging excessive force, racial profiling, and negligence. Lauren warned Marcus that these cases were notoriously difficult to win. "The system protects its own," she said, her voice heavy with experience. "But we're going to fight like hell." The legal battle was grueling. The police department's attorneys argued that Hargrove had acted in self-defense, claiming Aisha and Marcus had been non-compliant and posed a threat. They painted Marcus as an aggressive husband who had escalated the situation, and Aisha as a woman who shouldn't have gotten out of the car. The defense's tactics were infuriating, but Marcus refused to back down. He spent countless nights poring over legal documents, preparing for depositions, and reliving the trauma of that night to ensure every detail was accurate. Meanwhile, Aisha struggled with her recovery. The physical pain was manageable, but the emotional weight was crushing. She felt violated, not just by Hargrove's actions but by the system that seemed determined to justify them. She attended therapy sessions to cope with the anxiety and fear that now shadowed her every move. Yet, even in her pain, Aisha found strength in Marcus's resolve. "You're doing this for us," she told him one evening, her hand resting on his. "But you're also doing it for everyone else who's been hurt like this." As the case gained traction, Marcus realized that legal action alone wouldn't be enough. Hargrove was a symptom of a larger problem, a culture of impunity within the police department. Marcus began working with community organizers to push for systemic change. He spoke at rallies, sharing Aisha's story and calling for reforms like mandatory body cameras, independent oversight boards, and stricter consequences for officers with histories of misconduct. His voice, once quiet and reserved, grew stronger with every speech. He wasn't just fighting for his family anymore. He was fighting for a future where no one else would have to endure what they had. The turning point came when Marcus uncovered a critical piece of evidence. Using his tech skills, he analyzed metadata from the neighbor's video footage and cross-referenced it with police dispatch records. The data revealed that Hargrove had turned off his body camera during the incident, a violation of department policy. This discovery was a bombshell, undermining the department's claim that Hargrove had followed protocol. Lauren used this evidence to argue that Hargrove had intentionally tried to hide his actions, bolstering their case. The trial began in early 2024, nearly a year after the incident. The courtroom was packed with supporters, activists, and media. Aisha, now holding a healthy baby Maya in her arms, sat in the front row, her presence a silent testament to their resilience. Marcus took the stand, his voice steady as he recounted the night that changed their lives. He described Aisha's pain, the fear in her eyes, and the helplessness he felt as Hargrove stood over them, unrepentant. The jury listened intently, some visibly moved by his testimony. Hargrove's defense team tried to discredit Marcus, painting him as an angry man seeking revenge. But Marcus's calm demeanor and meticulous preparation made their narrative fall flat. When Lauren presented the evidence of Hargrove's disabled body camera, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. The prosecution also called witnesses, including neighbors who had recorded the incident and a former officer who testified about the department's lax oversight of problematic officers. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 3 days. The tension was unbearable for Marcus and Aisha, who waited in a small room at the courthouse, holding hands and praying for a just outcome. When the verdict was announced, the room fell silent. Hargrove was found guilty of excessive force and assault, a rare victory in cases against police officers. The judge sentenced him to 7 years in prison, a punishment that sent a ripple of shock through the courtroom. For the first time in months, Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. But Marcus's fight didn't end with the verdict. The civil lawsuit against the police department resulted in a substantial settlement, which Marcus and Aisha used to establish a foundation in Maya's name. The Maya Thompson Foundation focused on supporting victims of police violence, providing legal aid, therapy, and community resources. Marcus also worked with lawmakers to draft legislation requiring stricter oversight of police conduct, including mandatory body camera usage and public access to officer complaint records. Hargrove's conviction became a catalyst for change in Atlanta. The police department, under intense public pressure, implemented new training programs and began reviewing its internal investigation processes. Community activists credited Marcus's persistence for forcing the city to confront its failures. "He didn't just win a case," one organizer said at a rally. "He showed us what's possible when we refuse to give up." For Marcus and Aisha, the victory was bittersweet. They had fought for justice and won, but the scars of that night would never fully heal. Aisha still flinched at the sound of sirens, and Marcus carried the weight of knowing how close he'd come to losing his wife and daughter. Yet they found solace in their daughter, Maya, whose bright eyes and infectious laugh reminded them of what they were fighting for. Marcus's revenge wasn't rooted in vengeance, but in a relentless pursuit of accountability. He had taken a system designed to protect officers like Hargrove and forced it to bend toward justice. His fight inspired countless others, proving that one person's determination could spark a movement. As he stood at a community event, holding Maya in his arms while Aisha spoke about their journey, Marcus looked out at the crowd and felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead was long, but they had already changed the world for their daughter, and for countless others who would never have to face what they did.